When you research the history of the civil rights struggle, the word that comes to mind frequently is barriers. In many instances, society was erecting barriers to Black people, which denied them access to the most basic rights, including voting. The famous marches in Selma, Alabama, are part of that story because they were part of the broader campaign for voting rights for African Americans. The passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 did little to help Black Americans secure the right to vote in parts of the country. Despite legal protections, many African Americans faced other barriers, such as literacy tests and other discriminatory practices, preventing them from exercising their right to vote. This was particularly apparent here in Dallas County, Alabama. Here, Black Americans made up more than 50% of the population, but constituted only 2% of registered voters. In an effort to resolve that disparity, the Student Nonviolating Coordinating Committee, also known as the SNCC, spent months right here in the county seat of Selma trying to register Black voters. They tried to do that right here at the First Baptist Church. Unfortunately, they weren't making too much progress. In January of 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Council came to the area to lend a hand. Peaceful demonstrations led to thousands of people being arrested. That compelled Dr. King to write to the New York Times. He said, quote, "This is Selma, Alabama, and there are more Negroes in jail with me than there are on the voting rolls." According to History.com, the rising racial tensions finally bubbled over into bloodshed in the nearby town of Marion on February 18, 1965, when state troopers clubbed protesters and fatally shot 26-year-old Jimmy Lee Jackson, an African-American demonstrator trying to protect his mother who was being struck by police. In response, civil rights leaders planned to take their cause directly to Alabama Governor George Wallace on a 54-mile march from Selma to the state capital of Montgomery. Although Wallace ordered state troopers to use whatever measures are necessary to prevent a march, approximately 600 voting rights advocates set out from the Brown Chapel AME Church right here on Sunday, March 7th. The first attempted march from Selma to Montgomery resulted in brutal violence as peaceful demonstrators were attacked by state troopers right here at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Alabama officials responded with violent suppression of the peaceful protesters. The televised images really shocked the nation, and the event became known as Bloody Sunday. The result was widespread public outrage. Following the violence of Bloody Sunday, civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr., led a symbolic march on Turnaround Tuesday to demonstrate their commitment to nonviolence. This act further highlighted the determination of the civil rights movement in the face of adversity. Behind me is the Alabama River. On March 21, 1965, the final successful march from Selma to Montgomery occurred with federal protection of 1,000 military policemen and 2,000 Army troops. The marchers covered the 54-mile distance over 5 days. Thousands of people joined the way to Montgomery, with roughly 25,000 people entering the capital on the final leg of the march. On March 25th, the marchers made it to the entrance to the Alabama State Capitol building in Montgomery with a petition for Governor George Wallace. You can see that they're really trying to revive this downtown area because there's this little bit of art everywhere. It's been my experience that every time you see some interesting new art installations, it's a bit of an indication that they're trying to bring back a once desolate area. The Selma marches demonstrated the strength and resilience of the civil rights movement and drew attention to the need for federal legislation to protect voting rights. Those events prompted President Lyndon B. Johnson to address a joint session of Congress urging the swift passage of a comprehensive voting rights bill. This ultimately led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, signed into law on August 6, 1965. The act aimed to eliminate discriminatory voting practices, particularly in the South, and ensured federal oversight of election processes in jurisdictions with a history of voting discrimination. This episode is brought to you by me and my book, How to Stop Hating the Law.